Today we'll be reading from 1927 edition of Everyman's Library. That being, it would be, The Lives of the Painters, Sculptors, and Architects by Giorgio Vasari, Volume 4. And it being a direct translation, the name itself is spelt strange, suggesting a strange pronunciation, spelt Michelagnolo, suggesting the name Michelagnolo or Michelagnolo. To avoid that annoyance, I will read it in its more familiar pronunciation that we've come to know whenever that name comes up. A few of the names are adjusted, but we can get through those without too much trouble. Vasari's Lives. Michelangelo Buonarroti of Florence, painter, sculptor, and architect, 1475 to 1564. While industrious, the choice spirits, aided by the light afforded by Giotto and his followers, strove to show the world that the talent with which their happy stars and well-balanced humors had endowed them, and endeavored to attain to the height of knowledge by imitating the greatness of nature in all things. The great ruler of heaven looked down, and seeing these vain and fruitless efforts, and the presumptuous opinion of man more removed from truth than light from darkness, resolved, in order to rid him of these errors, to send to earth the genius universal in each art, to show single-handed the perfection of line and shadow, and who should give relief to his paintings, show a sound judgment in sculpture and in architecture, should render habitations convenient, safe, healthy, pleasant, well proportioned, and enriched with various ornaments. He further endowed him with a true moral philosophy and a sweet poetic spirit, so that the world should marvel at the singular eminence of his life and works, and all his actions seemed rather divine than earthly. In the arts of painting, sculpture, and architecture, the Tuscans have always been among the best, and Florence was the city in Italy most worthy to be the birthplace of such a citizen to crown her perfections. Thus, in 1474, the true and noble wife of Ludovico di Leonardo Buonarroti Simone, said to be of the ancient and noble family of the Counts of Canosa, gave birth to a son in the Casentino, under a lucky star. The son was born on Sunday, March the 6th, at 8 in the evening, and was called Michelangelo, as being of a divine nature, for Mercury and Venus were in the house of Jove at his birth, showing that his works of art would be stupendous. Ludovico at the time was Podesta at Chiusi and Caprice, near the Sasso della Vernia, where St. Francis received the stigmata, in the diocese of Arezzo. On laying down his office, Ludovico returned to Florence, to the villa of Settignano, 3 miles from the city, where he had a property inherited from his ancestor, a place full of rocks and quarries of massigno, which are constantly worked by stone-cutters and sculptors who are mostly natives. There Michelangelo was put to nurse with a stone-cutter's wife. Thus he once said jestingly to Vasari, "What good I have comes from the pure air of your native Arezzo, and also because I have sucked the chisels and hammers in with my nurse's milk." In time Ludovico had several children, and not being well off, he put them in the arts of wool and silk. Michelangelo, who was older, he placed with Maestro Francesco da Urbino to school. But the boy devoted all his time he could to drawing secretly, for which his father and seniors scolded and sometimes beat him, thinking that such things were base and unworthy of their noble house. About this time Michelangelo made friends with Francesco Granacci, who, though quite young, had placed himself with Domenico del Ghirlandaio to learn painting. Granacci perceived Michelangelo's aptitude for design and supplied him daily with drawings of Ghirlandaio, then reputed to be one of the best masters not only in Florence but throughout Italy. Michelangelo's desire to achieve thus increased daily, and Ludovico, perceiving that he could not prevent the boy from studying design, resolved to derive some profit from it, and by the advice of friends put him with Domenico Ghirlandaio, that he might learn the profession. At that time Michelangelo was 14 years old. The author of his life, footnote, Ascanio Condivi, end of footnote, written after 1550, when I first published this work, has stated that some, through not knowing him, have omitted things worthy of note, and stated others that are not true. And in particular, he taxes Domenico with envy, saying that he never assisted Michelangelo. This is clearly false, as may be seen by a writing in the hand of Ludovico, written in the books of Domenico, now in the possession of his heirs. It runs thus: 1488. Know this 1st of April, that I, Ludovico di Leonardo Buonarotto, apprentice, my son Michelangelo to Domenico, and David di Tommaso di Corrado, for the next 3 years, with the following agreements, that the said Michelangelo shall remain with them that time to learn to paint and practice that art, and shall do what they bid him, and they shall give him 24 florins in the 3 years, 6 in the first, 8 in the second, and 10 in the third, in all 96 lire. Below this Ludovico has written: Michelangelo has received 2 gold florins this 16th of April, and I, Ludovico di Leonardo, his father, have received 12 lire, 12 soldi. I have copied this from the book to show that I have written the truth, and I do not think that there is anyone who has seen more of Michelangelo who has been a greater and more faithful friend to him, or who can show a larger number of autograph letters than I. I have made this digression, in the interest of truth, and let this suffice for the rest of the life. We will now return to the story. Michelangelo's progress amazed Domenico when he saw him doing things beyond a boy, for he seemed likely not only to surpass the other pupils, of whom there were a great number, but would also frequently equal the master's own works. One of the youths happened one day to have made a pen sketch of a draped woman by his master. Michelangelo took the sheet, and with a thicker pen made a new outline for one of the women, representing her as she should be, and making her perfect. The difference between the two styles is as marvelous as the audacity of the youth whose good judgment led him to correct his master. The sheet is now in my possession, treasured as a relic. I had it from Granaccio, with others of Michelangelo, to place in the book of designs. In 1550, when Giorgio showed it to Michelangelo at Rome, he recognized it with pleasure, and modestly said that he knew more of that art when a child than later on in life. One day, while Domenico was engaged upon the large chapel of St. Maria Novella, Michelangelo drew the scaffolding and all the materials with some of the apprentices at work. When Domenico returned and saw it, he said, "He knows more than I do," and remained amazed at the new style produced by the judgment of so young a boy, which was equal to that of an artist of many years' experience. To this, Michelangelo added study and diligence, so that he made progress daily. As we buy a copy of a print engraved by Martin the German, footnote, Martin Schochen, end of footnote, which brought him great renown. When a copper engraving by Martin of St. Anthony, beaten by the devils, reached Florence, Michelangelo made a pen drawing, and then painted it. To counterfeit some strange forms of devils, he bought fish with curiously colored scales, and shown such ability that he won much credit and reputation. He also made perfect copies of various old masters, making them look old with smoke and other things, so that they could not be distinguished from the originals. He did this to obtain the originals in exchange for the copies, as he wanted the former and sought to surpass them, thereby acquiring a great name. At this time Lorenzo de' Medici the Magnificent kept Bertoldo the sculptor in his garden on the piazza of San Marco, not so much as the custodian of the numerous collections of beautiful antiquities there, as because he wished to create a school of great painters and sculptors with Bertoldo as the head, who had been pupil of Donato. Although old and unable to work, he was a master of skill and repute, having diligently finished Donato's pulpits and cast many bronze reliefs of battles and other small things, so that no one then in Florence could surpass him in such things. Lorenzo, who loved painting and sculpture, was grieved that no famous sculptors lived in his day to equal the great painters who then flourished, and so he resolved to found a school. Accordingly, he asked Domenico Ghirlandaio that if he had any youths in his shop inclined to this, he should send them to the garden, where he would have them instructed so as to do honor to him and to the city. Domenico elected among others Michelangelo and Francesco Granaccio as being the best. At the garden they found that the Torrigiano was modeling clay figures given to him by Bertoldo. Michelangelo immediately did some in competition, and Lorenzo, seeing his genius, always expected great things of him. Thus encouraged, the boy began in a few days to copy in marble an antique fawn's head, smiling with a broken nose. Footnote. Now in the Bargello, Florence. End of footnote. Although he had never previously touched marble or the chisel, he imitated it so well that Lorenzo was amazed, seeing that in addition the boy had opened its mouth and made the tongue and all the teeth. Lorenzo jestingly said, for he was a pleasant man, "You ought to know that the old never have all their teeth, and always lack some." Michelangelo, who loved and respected his patron, took him seriously in his simplicity, and so soon as he was gone he broke out a tooth, and made the gum look as if it had fallen out. He anxiously awaited the return of Lorenzo, who, when he saw Michelangelo's simplicity and excellence, laughed more than once, and related the matter to his friends as a marvel. He returned to help and favor the youth, and sending for his father Ludovico, asked him to allow him to treat the boy as his own son, a request that was readily granted. Accordingly, Lorenzo gave Michelangelo a room in the palace, and he ate regularly at table with the family and the other nobles staying there. This was the year after he had gone to Domenico, when he was 15 or 16, and he remained in the house for 4 years until after the death of Lorenzo in 92. I hear that he received a provision at this time from Lorenzo and 5 ducats a month to help his father. The Magnificent also gave him a violet mantle and conferred an office in the customs upon his father. Indeed, all the youths in the garden received a greater or less salary from the noble citizen, as well as rewards. By the advice of Poliziano, the famous man of letters, Michelangelo did a fight between Hercules and the centaurs. Footnote. Between Lapiths and centaurs, now in the Casa Buonarroti, Florence. End of footnote. On a piece of marble given him by the Signor, of such beauty that it seems the work of a consummate master, and not of a youth. It is now preserved in his house by his nephew Leonardo as a precious treasury in memory of him. Not many years since this, Leonardo had a Madonna in bas relief. Footnote. Also in the Casa Buonarroti. End of footnote. By his uncle, more than a braccia high, in imitation of Donatello's style, so fine that it seems the work of that master, except that it possesses more grace in design. Leonardo gave it to Duke Cosimo, who values it highly, as he possesses no other bas relief of the master. To return to Lorenzo's garden, it was full of antiques and excellent paintings, collected there for beauty, study, and pleasure. Michelangelo had the keys and was much more studious than the others in every direction, and always showed his proud spirit. For many months he drew Masaccio's paintings in the Carmine, showing such judgment that he amazed artists and others, and also roused envy. It is said that Torrigiano made friends with him, but moved by envy at seeing him more honored and skillful than himself, struck him so hard on the nose that he broke it and disfigured him for life. For this, Torrigiano was banished from Florence, as is related elsewhere. On the death of Lorenzo, Michelangelo returned home, much grieved at the loss of that great man and true friend of genius. Buying a large block of marble, he made a Hercules. Footnote. It went to the Fontainebleau and remained in the garden of the palace until 1713, since which time it has been lost. End of footnote. Of 4 braccia, which stood for many years in the Strozzi Palace, and was considered remarkable. In the year of the siege, it was sent to King Francis of France by Giove and Battista della Palla. It is said that Piero de' Medici, who had long associated with Michelangelo, often sent for him, wishing to buy antique cameos and other intaglios. And one snowy winter he got him to make a beautiful snow statue in the court of his palace. He so honored Michelangelo for his ability that his father, seeing him in such favor with the great, clothed him much more sumptuously than before. For San Spirito in Florence, Michelangelo made a wooden crucifix. Footnote. In 1494, now lost. End of footnote. Put over the lunette above the high altar to please the prior, who gave him suitable rooms where he was able, by frequently dissecting dead bodies, to study anatomy, and thereby he began to perfect his great design. At the time of the expulsion of the Medici from Florence, Michelangelo had gone to Bologna a few weeks before the event, and had then proceeded to Venice, fearing evil consequences from Piero's arrogance and bad government, for he was a member of the household. Finding no means of existence at Venice, he returned to Bologna, where he had the misfortune not to take the countersign on entering the gate to permit him to go out again. For M. Giovanni Bentivogli had ordained that those who had not the countersign should be condemned to pay 50 lire. Giovan Francesco Aldovrandi, one of the 16 governors, took compassion on him, made him relate the circumstances, released him, and entertained him in his house for more than a year. One day Aldovrandi took him to see the Ark of St. Dominic, made by Giovan Pisano and Maestro Niccolo del Locca, the old sculptors. He asked him if he had the courage to do an angel holding a candlestick and a St. Petronius, figures of about a brachia, that were wanting. Michelangelo replied in the affirmative, and on receiving the marble, made them, and they are the best figures there. He received 30 ducats for both from M. Francesco Aldovrandi. He remained rather more than a year at Bologna, and would have stayed longer to please Aldovrandi, who loved him for his design and liked to hear him read Dante, Petrarch, Boccaccio, and other Tuscan poets, with his Tuscan accent. But perceiving that he was wasting time, Michelangelo gladly returned to Florence. There he did a marble, St. John for Lorenzo di Piero Francesco de' Medici, and then began a life-size Sleeping Cupid, also in marble. When it was done, Baldassare del Milanese caused it to show to Pier Francesco, who said, "If you buried it, I feel sure that it would pass for an antique at Rome if made to appear old, and you would get much more than by selling it here." It is said that Michelangelo made it appear antique, and indeed it was an easy matter, as he had wit enough for this, and more. Others state that Milanese took it to Rome, buried it at his villa, and then sold it as an antique for 200 ducats to the Cardinal San Giorgio. It is also said that Milanese wrote to Per Francesco telling him to give the 30 crowns to Michelangelo, as he had not obtained more for the Cupid, thus deceiving the Cardinal, Pier Francesco, and Michelangelo. But it afterwards became known that the Cupid had been made in Florence. A Milanese agent was forced to restore the money and take back the figure. It came subsequently into the hands of Duke Valentino, who gave it to the Marchioness of Mantua, and she took it home to that city where it is now. Footnote. It has since vanished. End of footnote. The Cardinal, San Giorgio, did not escape blame for not recognizing the merit of the work, for when the moderns equal the ancients in perfection, it is a mere empty preference of a name to the reality, when men prefer the works of the latter to those of the former, though such men are found in every age. The noise of the matter so increased Michelangelo's reputation that he was immediately invited to Rome. Footnote. In 1496. End of footnote. And engaged by the Cardinal San Giorgio. He stayed nearly a year, but the Cardinal, knowing little of art, gave him nothing to do. At that time the Cardinal's barber, who colored in tempera very diligently, but could not design, made friends with Michelangelo, who made him a cartoon of St. Francis receiving the stigmata, which the barber executed in colors on a small panel with great diligence. It is now in the first chapel on the left on entering San Piero in Montorio. Footnote. Now lost. End of footnote. M. Jacopo Galli, an intelligent Roman noble, recognized Michelangelo's ability and employed him to make a marble Cupid of life size. Footnote. Probably the one now in South Kensington Museum. End of footnote. And then to do a Bacchus of 10 palms, holding a cup in the right hand, and in the left a tiger skin and a bunch of grapes with a satyr trying to eat them. Footnote. Now in the Bargello, Florence. End of footnote. This figure shows that he intended a marvelous blending of limbs, uniting the slenderness of a youth with the fleshy roundness of the female, proving Michelangelo's superiority in all the moderns in statuary. During his stay in Rome, he made such progress in art that his conceptions were marvelous, and he executed difficulties with the utmost ease, frightening those who were not accustomed to see such things, for when they were done, the works of others appeared as nothing beside them. Thus the Cardinal of St. Denis, called Cardinal Rohan, a Frenchman, desired to leave a memorial of himself in the famous city of such a rare artist, and got him to do a marble Pietà, which was placed in the chapel of San Maria della Febbre, in the Temple of Mars, in San Pietro. Footnote. The contract was made in 1498. The patron was Jean de Grosselet de Villiers, abbot of St. Denis and cardinal of St. Sabina, not the Cardinal de Rohan. End of footnote. The rarest artist could add nothing to its design and grace, or finish the marble with such polish and art, for it displays the utmost limits of sculpture. Among its beauties are the divine draperies, the foreshortening of the dead, Christ, and the beauty of the limbs with the muscles, veins, sinews, while no better presentation of a corpse was ever made. The sweet air of the head and the harmonious joining of the arms and legs to the torso, with the pulses and veins, are marvelous, and it is a miracle that a once shapeless stone should assume a form that nature with difficulty produces in flesh. Michelangelo devoted so much love and pains on this work that he put his name on the girdle crossing the Virgin's breast, a thing he never did again. One morning he had gone to the place to where it stands and observed a number of Lombards who were praising it loudly. One of them asked another the name of the sculptor, and he replied, Al Gobbo of Milan. Footnote. i.e., Cristoforo Solari of Milan. End of footnote. Michelangelo said nothing, but he resented the injustice of having his work attributed to another, and that night he shut himself in the chapel with a light and his chisels, and carved his name on it. It has been thus aptly described: Bellezza ed unstate, e doglia e pietà in vivo marmo morte, de com voi por fate, non piangate se forte, ceanze tempo risveglisi da morte, e per malgrado suo, nostro Signore e tuo, sposo, figliuolo e padre, unica sposa sua, figliuola e madre. It brought him great renown, and though some fools say that he has made the Virgin too young, they ought to know that spotless virgins keep their youth for a long time, while people afflicted like Christ do the reverse. So that should contribute more to increase the fame of his genius than all the things done before. Some of Michelangelo's friends wrote from Florence, urging him to return, as they did not want that block of marble on the opera to be spoiled with Piero Soderini. Then Gonfalonieri for life in the city, had frequently proposed to give to Leonardo da Vinci and then to Andrea Contucci, an excellent sculptor, who wanted it. Michelangelo, on returning, footnote, in 1501, it had been given to Agostino di Duccio in 1463, and taken from him 3 years later, end of footnote, tried to obtain it, although it was difficult to get an entire figure without pieces, and no other man except himself would have had the courage to make the attempt. But he had wanted it for many years, and on reaching Florence, he made efforts to get it. It was 9 braccia high, and unlikely. One Simone de Fiesole had begun a giant cutting between the legs, and mauling it so badly that the wardens of San Maria del Fiore had abandoned it without wishing to have it finished, and it had rested for many years. Michelangelo examined it afresh and decided that it could be hewn into something new while following the attitude sketched by Simone, and he decided to ask the wardens and Soderini for it. They gave it to him as worthless, thinking that anything he might do would be better than its present useless condition. Accordingly, Michelangelo made a wax model of a youthful David holding the sling to show that the city should be boldly defended and righteously governed. Following David's example, he began it in the opera, making the screen between the wall and the tables, and finished it without anyone having seen him at work. Footnote. In 1504, end of footnote. The marble had been hacked and spoiled by Simone, so that he could not do all that he wished with it, though he left some of Simone's work at the end of the marble, which may still be seen. This revival of a dead thing was a veritable miracle. When it was finished, various disputes arose as to who should take it to the piazza of the Signory. So Giuliano di Sangallo and his brother Antonio made a strong wooden frame and hoisted the figure onto it with ropes. Then he moved it forward by beams and windlasses and placed it in position. The knot of the rope which held the statue was made to slip so that it tightened as the weight increased, an ingenious device, the design for which is in our book, showing a very strong and safe method of suspending heavy weights. Piero Soderini came to see it and expressed great pleasure to Michelangelo, who was retouching it, though he said he thought the nose large. Michelangelo, seeing the Gonfaloniere below, and knowing that he could not see properly, mounted the scaffolding, and taking his chisel dexterously, let a little marble dust fall on to Gonfaloniere's, without, however, actually altering his work. Looking down, he said, "Look now, I like it better," said the Gonfaloniere. "You have given it life." Michelangelo therefore came down with feelings of pity for those who wish to seem to understand matters of which they know nothing. When the statue was finished and set up, Michelangelo uncovered it. It certainly bears the palm among all modern and ancient works, whether Greek or Roman, and the Morforio of Rome, the Tiber and Nile of Belvedere, and the colossal statues of Monte Cavallo do not compare with it in proportion and beauty. The legs are finely tuned, the slender flanks divine, and the graceful pose unequaled, while such feet, hands, and head have never been excelled. After seeing this, no one need wish to look at any other sculpture or the work of any other artist. Michelangelo received 400 crowns from Piero Soderini, and that would be Piero Soderini, and it was set up in 1504. Footnote, it was removed to the Accademia in 1873, end of footnote. Owing to his reputation thus acquired, Michelangelo did a beautiful bronze David. Footnote, in 1502, now lost, end of footnote, for the Gonfaloniere, which he sent to France, and he sketched out 2 marble medallions. Footnote, one in the Royal Academy, London, and the other in the Bargello. End of footnote. One for Taddeo, Taddai, and now in his house. The other for Bartolomeo Pitti, which was given by Fra Miniato Pitti of Monte Oliveto, a master of cosmography and many sciences, especially painting, to his intimate friend Luigi Guicciardini. These works were considered admirable. At the same time, he sketched a marble statue of St. Matthew in the Opera of San Maria del Fiore. Footnote, in 1503, end of footnote, which showed his perfection and taught sculptors the way to make statues without spoiling them, by removing the marble so as to enable them to make such alterations as may be necessary. He also did a bronze Madonna in a circle. Footnote, now in Notre Dame, Bruges, done for John and Alexander Mouscron in 1505. End of footnote. Carved at the request of some Flemish merchants of the Mascheroni noblemen in their country, who paid him 100 crowns and sent it to Flanders. His friend, Agnolo Doni, citizen of Florence, and the lover of all beautiful works, whether ancient or modern, desired to have something of his. Michelangelo, therefore, began a round painting of the Virgin kneeling and offering the child to Joseph. Footnote, painted in 1503, now in the Uffizi, where he shows his marvelous power in the head of the mother, fixedly regarding the beauty of the child, and the emotion of Joseph in reverently and tenderly taking it, which is obvious without examining it closely. As this did not suffice to display his powers, he made seated, standing, and reclining nude figures in the background, completing the work with such finish and polish that it is considered the finest of his few panel paintings. When finished, he sent it wrapped up to Agnolo's house by a messenger with a note and a request for 70 ducats as payment. Agnolo, being a careful man, thought this a large sum for one picture, though he knew it was worth more. So he gave the bearer 40 ducats, saying that was enough. Michelangelo at once sent demanding 100 ducats or the return of the picture. Andrea, being delighted with the picture, then agreed to give 70 ducats. But Michelangelo, being incensed by Agnolo's mistrust, demanded double what he had asked the first time, and Agnolo, who wanted the picture, was forced to send him 140 crowns. When Leonardo da Vinci was painting in the great hall of the council, as related in his life, Piero Soderini, the Gonfaloniere, allotted to Michelangelo a part of that hall. Footnote, in 1504, end of footnote. For he perceived his great genius, and the artist chose the War of Pisa as his subject. Footnote, the scene represented the Battle of Cassina, which took place on the 28th of July, 1364, when Sir John Hawkwood surprised the Florentines. He was given a room in the Dyer's Hospital at San Onofrio, and there began a large cartoon which he allowed no one to see. He filled it with nude figures bathing in the Arno, owing to the heat, and running in this condition to their arms on being attacked by the enemy. He represented them hurrying out of the water to dress and seizing their arms to go assist their comrades, some buckling their cuirasses and many putting on other armor, while others on horseback are beginning the fight. Among other figures is an old man wearing a crown of ivy to shade his head, trying to pull his stockings on to his wet feet. Hearing the cries of the soldiers and the beating of the drums, he is struggling violently, all his muscles to the tips of his toes and his contorted mouth showing the effects of the exertion. It also contained drums and nude figures with twisted draperies running to the fray, foreshortened in extraordinary attitudes, some upright, some kneeling, some bent, and some lying. There were also many groups sketched in various ways, some merely outlined in carbon, some with features filled in, some hazy or with white lights, to show his knowledge of art. And indeed, artists were amazed when they saw the lengths he had reached in this cartoon. Some, in seeing this divine figures, declared that it was impossible for any other spirit to attain to its divinity. When finished, footnote, in 1506, and a footnote, it was carried to the Pope's Hall amid the excitement of artists and to the glory of Michelangelo and all those who studied and drew from it, as foreigners and natives did for many years afterwards, became excellent artists, as we see by Aristotile de Sangallo, his friend, Rodolfo Ghirlandaio, Raphael Sanzio, Francesco Granaccio, Baccio Bandinelli, Alonso Berrughetta, a Spaniard, with Andrea del Sarto, Francio Biggio, Jacopo Sansovino, Rosso, Maturino, Lorenzetto, Tribolo, then a child, Jacopo da Pontormo, and Perino del Vaga, all great Florentine masters. Having become a school for artists, this cartoon was taken to the great hall of the Medici Palace, where it was entrusted to freely to artists, for during the illness of Duke Giuliano, it was unexpectedly torn to pieces and scattered in many places. Entrusted too freely. Of course, spelled T-O-O. Too freely to artists, for during the illness of Duke Giuliano, it was unexpectedly torn to pieces and scattered in many places. Footnote, see Volume 3, page 190. Mr. Symonds gives reasons for doubting this story, Life of Michelangelo, I, 164, and a footnote. Some fragments still being in the house of M. Umberto Strozzi, a Mantuan noble, where they are regarded with great reverence. Indeed, they are more divine than human. The Pietà, the colossal statue, and the cartoon gave Michelangelo such a name that when in 1503, footnote, it was actually 1505, and a footnote, Julius II succeeded Alexander the Sixth, he sent for the artist, who was then about 29, to make his tomb, paying him 100 crowns for the journey. After reaching Rome, it was many months before he did anything. At last he settled on a design for the tomb, surpassing in beauty and richness of ornament all ancient and imperial tombs, affording the best evidence of his genius. Stimulated by this, Julius decided to rebuild San Pietro in order to hold the tomb, as related elsewhere. Michelangelo set to work with spirit, and first went to Carrara to obtain all the marble, accompanied by 2 apprentices, receiving 1,000 crowns for this from Alamanno Salviati at Florence. He spent 8 months there, without receiving any further provision, his mind being full of projects for making great statues there as a memorial to himself, as the ancients had done, for he felt the fascination of the blocks. Having chosen his marble, he sent it by sea to Rome, where it filled half the piazza of San Pietro towards San Caterina, and the space between the church and the corridor leading to Castello. Here Michelangelo made his studio for producing his figures and the rest of the tomb. In order that the Pope might readily come to see him work, he made a drawbridge from the corridor of the studio. His intimacy with the Pope grew out of this, but it afterwards brought him great annoyance and persecution, giving rise to much envy among artists. Of this work, during Julius's life and after his death, Michelangelo did 4 complete statues and sketched 8, as I shall relate. The work being devised with great invention, I will describe the ordering of it. Michelangelo wished it to stand isolated in order to make it appear larger, showing all 4 sides, 12 braccia on one, and 18 for the other 2. About it he arranged a series of niches, separated by terminal figures clothed from the middle upwards and bearing the first cornice on their heads, such one in a curious attitude and having a nude prisoner bound, standing on a projection from the basement. These prisoners were to represent the provinces subdued by the Pope and rendered obedient to the Church. Other statues, also bound, represent the sciences and fine arts doomed to death like the Pope who had protected them. At the corners of the first cornice were 4 large figures, active and contemplative life, St. Paul and Moses. Above the cornice, the work was on a smaller scale, with a frieze of bronze, bas-reliefs, and other figures, infants and ornaments. As a completion, there were 2 figures above, one a smiling heaven, supported the bier on the shoulders, with Cybele, goddess of the earth, who seems to grieve that the world has lost such a man, while the other rejoices that his soul has passed to celestial glory. There was an arrangement to enter at the top of the work between the niches, and an oval place to move about in the middle, like a church in the midst of which the sarcophagus to contain the Pope's body was to be placed. In all, it was to have 40 marble statues without counting the reliefs, infants, and ornaments, the carved cornices, and other architectural parts. For greater convenience, Michelangelo ordered that a part of the marble should be taken to Florence, where he proposed to spend the summer to escape from the malaria of Rome. There he completed one face of the work in several pieces, and at Rome divinely finished 2 prisoners. Footnote. In 1513 they are now in the Louvre, and other statues which are unsurpassed. That they might not be otherwise employed, he gave the prisoners to Signor Roberto Strozzi, in whose house Michelangelo had fallen sick. They were afterwards sent to King Francis as a gift, and are now at Ecouen, or Cavan, in brackets, in France. He sketched 8 statues at Rome and 5 at Florence, and finished a Victory. Footnote. Now in the Bargello, and a footnote, above a prisoner now owned by Duke Cosimo, who had it from the artist's nephew, Leonardo. The Duke has placed it in the great hall of the palace, painted by Vasari. Braccia. That's simply painted by Vasari. I wonder if Vasari mentioned here is the same Vasari of this writing, right? He mentions himself. Is that the case? If you know, leave it in the comments. Michelangelo finished the Moses in marble, a statue of 5 brachia unequaled by any modern or ancient work. Seated in a serious attitude, he rests with one arm on the tables, and with the other holds his long glossy beard, the hair so difficult to render in sculpture, being so soft and downy that it seems that as if the iron chisel must have become a brush. The beautiful face, like that of a saint and mighty prince, seems, as one regards it, to need the veil to cover it, so splendid and shining does it appear, and so well has the artist presented in the marble the divinity with which God had endowed that holy countenance. The draperies fall in graceful folds. The muscles of the arms and bones of the hands are of such beauty and perfection, as are the legs and knees, the feet being adorned with excellent shoes, that Moses may now be called the friend of God more than ever, since God has permitted his body to be prepared for the resurrection before the others by the hand of Michelangelo. The Jews still go every Saturday in troops to visit and adore it as a divine, not a human thing. Interesting. At length he finished this part, which was afterwards set up in San Pietro ad Vincola. It is said that while Michelangelo was engaged upon it, the remainder of the marble from Carrara arrived at Ripa, and was taken with the rest to the Piazza of San Pietro. As it was necessary to pay those who brought it, Michelangelo went as usual to the Pope. But the Pope had that day received important news concerning Bologna. So Michelangelo returned home and paid for the marble himself, expecting to be soon repaid. He returned another day to speak to the Pope, and found difficulty in entering, as the porter told him to wait, saying he had orders to admit no one. A bishop said to the porter, "Perhaps you do not know this man." "I know him very well," said the porter, "but I am here to execute my orders." Unaccustomed to this treatment, Michelangelo told the man to inform the Pope he was away when next His Holiness inquired for him. Returning home, he set out post at 2 in the morning, leaving 2 servants with instructions to sell his things to the Jews, and to follow him to Florence. Reaching Poggibonzi, in Florentine territory, he felt safe, not being aware that 5 couriers had arrived with letters from the Pope with orders to bring him back. But neither prayers nor letters which demanded his return upon pain of disgrace moved him in the least. However, at the instance of the couriers, he at length wrote a few lines asking the Pope to excuse him, saying he would never return, as he had been driven away like a rogue, that his faithful service merited better treatment, and that he should find someone else to serve him. On reaching Florence, Michelangelo finished in 3 months the cartoon of the Great Hall, which Piero Soderini, the Gonfaloniere, desired him to finish. The Signoria received at that time 3 letters from Pope demanding that Michelangelo should be sent back to Rome. On this account, it is said that, fearing the Pope's wrath, he thought of going to Constantinople to serve the Turk by means of some Franciscan friars, from whom he learned that the Turk wanted him to make a bridge between Constantinople and Pera. However, Piero Soderini persuaded him against his will to go to the Pope, and sent him as ambassador of Florence to secure his person to Bologna, whither the Pope had gone from Rome. Footnote. That was in 1506, end of footnote. With letters of recommendation to Cardinal Soderini, the Gonfalonieri's brother, who was charged to introduce him to the Pope. There is another account of this departure from Rome, that the Pope was angry with Michelangelo, who would not allow him to see any of his things. The artist suspected his assistants of having received bribes from the Pope more than once to admit him to look at the chapel of his uncle Sixtus, which he was having painted on certain occasions when Michelangelo was not at home or at work. It happened once that Michelangelo hid himself, for he suspected the betrayal by his apprentices, and threw down some planks as the Pope entered the chapel, and, not thinking who it was, caused him to be summarily ejected. At all events, whatever the cause, he was angry with the Pope, and also afraid of him, and so he ran away. End of section 1 of this reading. Vasari's Lives, Michelangelo.